Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Binus, and I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm joined today by my co-host,
Amanda Anguish, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
All right, well, today we are going to be talking about the psychology of marketing. So if you've ever been duped, or maybe you know somebody who has by some sales promotion or something, or you don't want to be duped, then this is for you. And Amanda, let's start out by asking you, what is your interest? Why are you interested in this topic, the psychology of marketing?
Well, before I became a therapist, my undergraduate degree was in public relations. And with that, I took marketing and advertising classes and that sort of thing. And I even spent some time doing fundraising for a living. So I've always been interested in the psychology of just about anything. And particularly, I've told people that no offense to anybody who's in marketing, but if I didn't have a conscience, I would love to do psychology. I'd love to do marketing psychology. And so it very much fascinates me. And as someone who likes to think through all of my decisions, I want to not be duped when I'm out there buying things I think I need, but I don't. And I also want to help other people understand the science of marketing and the psychology of marketing to help themselves understand themselves better when they go out there as a consumer.
Yeah, a lot of this ends up boiling down to, why do people choose to do the things that they do, especially, of course, when it comes to spending money. But that's something most of us do several times a week, usually maybe even every day, right? And so it's a very interesting topic, because when you think even about the stressors that people face, what's the number one stressor that most people think about when they think about stress?
Oh man, there's a lot of things.
Well, actually, according to surveys, it is finances. And
yes,
when we talk about thinking how to deal with marketing and not getting suckered into some of these things, I think it's really important to understand some of the psychology behind that, so that we don't just automatically go with whatever we maybe feel like in the moment, or what looks shiny and new and interesting, because by doing that, we can really save ourselves a lot of stress, a lot of relational problems, a lot of sleepless nights, perhaps. And so, Amanda, I really appreciate that you have taken the time, and you're not only have the background, with psychology, but you also understand, because of your training, some of the elements of marketing. And so, could you help us maybe understand a little bit about some of the psychology that goes into marketing? Because I think in order not to get tricked by something, it's helpful to understand a little bit more what's behind that, how they use marketing to, perhaps at times we might even say, manipulate us into doing things that we don't necessarily want to do. I mean, sometimes suddenly I feel like I need something, even though before I never thought or even thought about it or knew it existed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the starting points that's really important is to help people understand that behind just about every single product that's out there, especially the big brand ones, there are a group of scientists and psychologists that are working really hard to understand people's behaviors and their thinking in order to figure out how to sell their product to that person. So it's not just, somebody had a good idea for a product and then they put it out on the market, but there's a lot of psychology even to the success of that product being in people's homes and in their hands or services, because of the psychologists behind that. And I'll just give you an example. So it used to, when, say, a couple goes to buy a car, maybe they've seen multiple commercials for that car. So they're watching those commercials, and typically, I mean, I don't want to be very generalized in this, but typically men want certain things from a car versus women want other things from a car. And so if the couple goes together, the psychologists understand the dynamics of that. By the way, they also understand who often vetoes the decision. It's the woman who often makes the final decision for the car. Because, say, for instance, the husband or the man in the relationship will say, oh, it's fast, or oh, that looks cool, or it drives this way or that way. Well, the wife will often say, but honey, this one's the safest
Yes,
one. And
safety,
so
right?
the psychologists know, well, where do we want this car to land in terms of if we know the women are often making the choices. So a sports car wouldn't necessarily go for the safest person because maybe men are more prone to buy sports cars. But if it's a minivan, who do you think's going to make the final
Oh,
decision
yeah.
on that? So they're going to build up all of the things that maybe women would care about because they're probably going to make the final decision on that.
Oh, that's fascinating. And so and you think about the amount of money that's spent on making these products, you better believe there's going to be a lot of money on
Millions per product
right,
sometimes.
on marketing them, because otherwise it's a waste, right? And so there is a lot of money spent on the psychology. So can you tell us a little more, some of the details behind the psychology when it comes to marketing to us as consumers?
Yeah, so there's generally 4 P's of marketing. The first one's product, and that has to do with the name. So even, we see a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and they just have like these interesting names. Sometimes it has a little bit of the diagnosis in it that it's used for, plus a bunch of extra X's, Y's, and Z's or something.
Right.
There's psychology to that. Also, the design of the package, the packing that it goes into when it's sold. Does it satisfy a need that the person has? And does it provide an experience for that person? And that's just the first of the 4 P's, product. Then price. This can be cost of it. It can be discounting. And you think they have to think of a price, but there's a lot of psychology that goes into, well, how much would people spend on this versus how much do we want to make on it versus how many people do we think actually want the product? Do we put it at a high price point because then they see it as a luxury item versus a lesser price point, even though the quality is the same as something else on the market? So all of these things are important in terms of the price. Place. How and where do consumers find the product? So if you go into a grocery store, they call them like, oh, I can't even remember the name, but they'll put certain products at the end of the aisle so you see them when you're going in.
Like the end caps you're talking about?
End caps, that's what they're called, yes. Or even they place the sugar cereals down where the kids can see them as their eyes go by versus where do the healthy cereals wind up?
I think the health department should intervene there. That seems like a real hazard for America's health.
Yeah, the healthy ones tend to be on the upper parts of the shelves where the adults are going to reach them, but certain products will actually pay for a certain place in the supermarket, knowing that, oh, a kid could reach it here, or if the kid's in the shopping cart, they can just lean over and grab it. So parents have a hard time saying no, and then it winds up in their cart. And then the last one is promotion. So how do we advertise this product? How do we communicate about it? The public relations of it, that's part of what I learned in school. And how do we entice somebody to actually make this purchase? And a lot of people know in marketing that if you get somebody, and this is happening early and earlier, if you get somebody to buy a product earlier in life, they tend to be more loyal to it. So we're seeing, with cartoons and stuff on TV, certain advertisements that I want this kid to to like this. which encourages the parent to buy it, which then this kid will stay loyal to this brand for the rest of their life. That's just one
Well,
example.
you wonder why some of these fast food chains have playgrounds.
Playgrounds,
Right?
yes,
That's a
and
great way
Happy
to,
Meals.
yes, all of that is a great way to just suck those kids right in. And they're like, oh, this is, I remember that fondly in my childhood. And you have
Yeah.
that experience, right? It's not just eating a meal and getting food, it's a whole experience.
And even the toy, they may
Yes.
lose some money on the toy, but they're gaining it in loyalty over time. So they're creating something that's going to have long term
Yeah.
stamina.
And so that even if the kid gets a stomach ache after they eat what they do, they're like, but I have the toy. And
Yeah.
they forget the stomach ache, right?
And the toy might wind up in the trash eventually, but they have that memory of playing in the playground,
That's right.
having the toy, and that sort of thing.
So product, price,
Place
place,
and
and promotion.
promotion.
Yeah, because usually I've always thought of marketing more on the promotion side, but there's so much even that goes on before that to make sure that it's something that could be appealing to me. And then the promotion seems like that's kind of like, okay, now I'm going to get your attention and seal the deal, so to speak. But there's a lot of background that goes on there that you don't even think about.
Yeah, an interesting story with that is I believe it was J.C. Penney that they would have these, and they may still have them. I don't know the success of the company, but they had this thing where you could clip coupons, plus on top of that, get discounts. And there was a large following of people who would get so excited about clipping their coupons, adding another 20% discount on top of that to a 50% original discount off of the item, that they wound up getting a new CEO. And the CEO thought, this is ridiculous. By the way, this is a good example of not understanding your audience. The CEOs thought it was ridiculous and cut out all of the middle work that consumers were doing to get these discounts and buy the product, and just said, this is our low price promise. Like, this is just what it is. You don't need to clip a coupon or get a discount. And people stopped buying stuff
Wow.
because it turned out that the culture of their market was, we want to do the work. It makes us feel good to feel like we're
Yes.
getting the
We're
best
getting a
deal
deal.
ever.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we have to do something to get that deal. Another example of that, too, was years ago. I think this was maybe even in the 50s, that they came out with these box mixes of cake, and they weren't selling because they had all of the ingredients in them. So yes, women wanted something to be, easier, but they weren't selling them because they couldn't say they did anything. So then they started taking the eggs or the oil out, and you had to add it yourself, and suddenly the sales went way up.
That's fascinating. And it really reminds me that it's not the psychological process, the seeking aspect is really important and rewarding for us as human beings. They've done studies on animals like cats, for example, that find that the cats enjoy the hunt just as much, if not more, than the actual eating part, right? So this is why it's very pathetic and sad when you see it, right? But our cat will often play with her prey, whether it's a lizard or a mouse or whatever, and it's half mutilated. But it's almost like she wants to keep it alive because that's exciting for her. And then when
Yeah.
it's dead, it's boring. And so that seeking aspect gives a lot of dopamine and is an important part of the whole consumer process. And it seems like, when marketers can kind of engage their audience, so to speak, in a way that where they feel like they're having to almost do something or they're involved in that process, then it becomes a more rewarding experience for them as well.
So even the lazier we get in our society, we still want something that we
Yes.
can do. And that actually goes into the next thing, which is social identity. So companies really want to understand, and you and I were talking about this beforehand, they want to understand not just who the culture thinks they are or who, where we're going necessarily, but who we want to be defined as. So that has to do with social identity. So these companies and these marketers spend a lot of time figuring out who we want to be to market the product to that. So an example of that, and this is one of my favorite examples, is the peanut butter brand Jif. So for a long time, and I don't know if it's still the case now because I don't watch TV and see these commercials, but for a long time, their slogan was "Choosy Moms Choose
Jif.
Jif." Well, what does every mom want to be considered?
Like selective and choosy for their kids,
I'm
right?
the best mom because I
Yeah.
take the time to look for the best things for my kids, which make my kids the best kids that they can be. And so they really capitalized on, something that every mom wants to feel like. So if you go to the grocery store and you've heard that slogan over and over and over again, and you identify as a choosy or discerning or really good mom, well, you're more likely to go towards their peanut butter
Yes.
because that's who you want to identify with. And this is why we all tend to, I mean, every single one of us has some aspect of this in us where we identify with certain brands because they've created themselves to be who we want to be and who we think we are so that we will suddenly identify with them. So they're watching the culture to see who do people want to be and who do they think they are. And then that's who we're going to be for
Wow.
them.
Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating because you can just see it becomes almost this magnetic pull and the branding element, because then once you've identified with a particular brand and they're creating this persona, then it's easy to keep going back to that because you now have a relationship with that brand. Like I kind of trust that they know what I or who I am and want to become, and it really goes to get together with who I want to become, and so we just keep going back and back and back, and but we have to be a little careful with that too, because what if that brand that we have this relationship with starts going a direction that maybe isn't quite the direction that is healthy or good for us too.
Well, and this is largely why so many companies have celebrities
Mm,
who maybe epitomize their brand.
okay.
So then I want to be like that celebrity, and that celebrity uses this product or this service or that clothing brand and that sort of thing. And then what happens when they mess up in society?
Yeah.
Then they certainly have to like disregard or discard that celebrity and then rebuild their brand again and maybe try to find somebody else who epitomizes that too. So there's a lot of pressure on them to really hone in to who do we want to market to and how do we create this whole experience and identity around
and
that.
and make sure their celebrity behaves well, right?
Yes. And I would like to say to our audience, too, something to keep in mind if you somehow find out the brand or product that a celebrity is using, you can 99.99999% of that know that that person has been paid to use that product. They
Absolutely.
don't get those things. They don't just go, "Oh, I have this." I even have a friend who, she used to work for a major television channel, and her job was product placement. So her job was to put different products in different shows, not commercials, in different shows, because that show would then write their script around that product to make the product look exactly the way the company wanted it to
Wow.
look. And
That's
that was just for the product, not
just
even the commercials.
that's amazing. So are there any other elements that we should learn about when it comes to the psychology of marketing?
Yeah, so there's something else called mere exposure effect. And we know this in psychology. You can consider it like frequency, you can consider it reinforcement or repetition. Sometimes even you can consider it like desensitization. So the more a product is seen, the more we start to accept it. So anytime we see something new or a brand that's new, at first it doesn't really have an effect on us usually. It's the repetition of that product. That's why you'll see the same commercial 800 times in the middle of a show, because they know the more you get used to it, the more likely you are to accept it into your life and then even start to buy it or use that service. So that's why we see things like billboards at stadiums. You think like, how's anything coming out of that? Did somebody go buy Coke just because they saw that? It's just in the background. It's not really, but it's not about the fact that you're probably not going to buy it at that point. It's that you're seeing it there. You're seeing it over here. You're seeing it over here. You're seeing it so many times that you're just starting to allow it to be a part of your life, so that the next time when you're in the grocery store, you won't even think about the fact that, oh, I'm just going to pick this up because it's just a part of my life.
Well, and that really reminds me too, because when we think about marketing, especially through media and billboards for that matter too, but especially I'm thinking about media right now. When we think about television or social media or any other media channels, essentially what happens when we're watching TV is that our frontal lobe is suppressed, or when we're playing video games or doing social media, our frontal lobe is suppressed, which we know the frontal lobe has to do with logic and decision making and all of this.
And part of that's the hypnotic effect of television, the way it works too.
Yeah. And so essentially, when we're watching like a commercial, because our judgment is impaired, because the frontal lobe is impaired, all of this information is coming in, both on the show, but also in the commercials, of course, essentially unfiltered. And we're not critically evaluating the information that is coming in, and it's just coming in, it's touching our emotions.
Absolutely. That's a big part of it.
And then it's being stored, even if we're not consciously trying to store it, it's still being stored in our memory. And then, like you said, we go to the store and we might not be thinking about, the latest commercial or what have you, but we're a little hungry. We go to the checkout lane and we see like, oh, look. And subconsciously our brain is kind of priming us, right? And so we might look at the Snickers, for example, and we might not be like, oh yeah, I remember that commercial that the guy that ate it was really satisfied afterwards, right? But our subconscious mind is remembering that feeling, that sense of like, hey, that guy, even if we don't consciously remember the commercial, it's priming us to make that decision, right? And so it's fascinating when you think about, like you said, that repetition, especially if we see things over and over again, and all that information is coming in essentially unfiltered when we're not even aware. Like those billboards were passing by on the highway, we're not like, oh yeah, well, let me remember that billboard. No. But it's all being stored in our memory, and then it's priming us to make these decisions, because ultimately it seems like a lot of the decisions we make, even though we would like to think they're logical, I mean, I'll ask you, how many of our decisions are really logical as a therapist?
Not very many. And a lot of us go through life not even realizing how many of our decisions have been primed by the things that we've experienced in society. Even, they've shown that, when a war might be coming up, what will you see a lot of? You might see war movies. Even the government will actually pay money for a war movie or a military movie to be made at the time where maybe they need more soldiers to be fighting. Because if I have a good connotation of like, yeah, I'm the man, I've, fought this battle and won, if I can associate with the people in the roles, then I'm more likely to sign up now if they're saying we need more military and that sort of thing. And so those emotions are really key in why they do the things that they do. And I'm not saying, I don't want anybody to think like, oh, this is so bad and everybody's horrible that does this, because sometimes you need to do something. You might need more soldiers. And how do you do that in a way that really reaches people's hearts and makes them want to do something that we do absolutely need? But I really, and this, I know this is your belief too, I really want to help people not be a sucker when it comes to living in this world and experiencing the things that we do, and really pay attention to what's going on around us.
So Is there anything else that we need to know about the psychology before we go into that? Because that's what I'm really curious about. Now that we've kind of talked about these psychological elements, the psychology of marketing, how can I not get duped? How can I not get sucked in? Because it's just ubiquitous. It's everywhere. That we are being bombarded with messages of buy this, do this, do this. And so, how do we not get sucked into just being kind of, yeah, just the next going through life and thinking that we're actually living freely and making decisions, but in reality, we're kind of being puppeted.
Yeah. So, one of the things I think, and this is the whole point of talking about it in the first place, is to help people be mindful of what's actually happening. So, maybe pay attention, just spend a day noticing, like, how many times am I being marketed to, do I think? The other thing that I think is really powerful, and I know our society loves to talk about emotions, but then we don't often talk about what to do with those once we recognize our emotions. So, the first thing is recognize where you might have emotional deficiencies. Not that you don't have emotions, but maybe you deal with a lot of anxiety. Maybe you deal with inadequacy feelings or depression feelings or, guilt, even. And if you recognize that you have those certain feelings that come up over and over again, then recognize, how might I be manipulated by these feelings to try to buy something or a product or a service that will encourage me to get out of that feeling, but yet never truly gives me the satisfaction of being out of that emotion. It's almost like it drives it deeper and deeper and deeper to buy more and more and more. So, I think of, even all of the companies that deal with aesthetics. Makeup is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Well, how do you get people to buy more makeup if they feel really good about themselves?
Yeah.
If they feel like they're beautiful in all the shapes and sizes and colors and everything that they are, unless you tell them that on one hand, but then you say, because they don't want to just be outright mean, but you say, you're great, but you could do this a little bit more and be even better. And so if you have those deficiency feelings or those inadequacy or insecurity feelings, then you might be playing the game and not even realize that you're a part of it. And it's making you feel worse and worse and worse.
So salespeople will take advantage of those I shouldn't say inadequacies. What I should say is those fears, those areas that we are struggling with. Those areas that we feel particularly insecure. Maybe is a good word.
Yeah, and it's natural to have certain of those feelings and to want to better ourselves. And that's why we want to be mindful of that so we can make better decisions about what would actually help me. Would it help me to get closer to my loved ones and spend time with them and be encouraged by them, or just focus on how I look and those sorts of things? Or would it be helpful for me to, listen to what God says about who I am versus what somebody else thinks that I should do to be better?
Yes. And remembering that beauty in that regard is skin deep, and the true beauty is so much deeper, and really reflecting on that, because again, that whole persona identity thing, the culture often paints that, oh, this is what you look like to be beautiful, but in reality, the things that bring true meaning to life are so much deeper. And so not sacrificing, the things that are truly meaningful and going to bring true happiness and joy for those things that will maybe make us feel better temporarily, but don't really have any true meat in them.
It's hard to make money off of character traits.
Yeah, that's true. Because those things money can't buy, right?
You really can't buy character. You can buy looks and you can buy aesthetics and that sort of thing, but you can't buy character.
Yeah.
And if we feel those feelings, there is a healthy way to feel better. Sometimes if you're not satisfied with the way you look, focus less on how you look and the function of those things. I think we've mentioned that before. So if I don't like the way my legs look, well, don't focus on just what they look like. Focus on wow, I have legs and they get me from point A to point B, and they're really consistent with getting me to that place. And, they feel strong sometimes too, and that sort of thing. Well, now I'm starting to change the way that I feel about my legs
Right.
because I'm focusing on something that they're able to do, not just how they look.
Those are good legs, right?
Those are good, sturdy legs.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So you've talked about identifying our insecurities as a way to beware of not getting sucked into uh, marketing schemes and duped and all that. Any other things that we can be careful of?
Yeah, just one more thing with the emotion too. Sometimes fear can be a great motivator, not a good motivator, but a great motivator in terms of getting us to do something impulsively. Um, we're looking at, I don't know when this episode will come out, but we're looking at an election coming up. And even the way our politicians market themselves, they look for somewhere where we might be fearful, and then they promise us all kinds of things that they're going to do. And yet 4 years later, how much have they actually done for that? And I
Yes.
don't care what side you're on.
Right.
But if I can play to a fear that you might have, then I can promise you just about anything will fulfill or satisfy that fear or make you feel less fearful. And then I can really take advantage of you. And you might be left going, wow, that didn't really do anything.
Yeah. And it reminds me too, a lot of marketing is very time limited. It's kind of like, okay, get this today or it's going to be gone tomorrow sort of thing, or the sale ends today. And so there's that fear factor of, I'm going to miss out if I don't get it now. So that really makes a lot of sense. One other thing I was just thinking, since I mentioned earlier about the whole media thing, is I think, it's got to be so important to be really careful what we're looking at, what we're watching, what we're exposing ourselves to through media, through our
Absolutely.
phones, through the computer, through the television. All of that is essentially changing the way that we think and what we are attracted to.
That's really important because we're talking mostly about companies and brands, but I think even more powerful than that is ideas. And whether we realize it or not, our media and other things too we have to be careful. Are these ideas that I want my kids to adopt, myself to adopt? And over again, if we have that desensitization because of repetition, I might start to let down some of my guards because I think because it normalizes it. So things that weren't normal to me before, and you can see this through society. This is why generations have such a hard time with each other because this isn't what we did when I was that age. And well, mom, you got to get with the times, or grandma, you got to get with the times. This is just how it is. It's because even ideas are often suggested to us and they're marketed, and some would call it propaganda, that over time, we don't think anything different of them, even though in the past we might have said, oh, I don't believe in that, or I don't like that. And so we really have to be careful what we expose ourselves to because we are very susceptible to this. When you have people that spend billions of dollars to even get an idea out there over and over and over again, we become very likely to adopt that idea because we're around it so much and we normalize it.
Most of us have heard the old adage, by beholding, we become changed.
Changed.
And it is so true. And if you think you're an exception to that because your principles are so strong and so high and all of this, you're kidding yourself. And studies actually even show that oftentimes we don't see when we're being changed and when we're being affected by media, especially, and our environment in general. And so it's so important that we're choosy with that. So thank
Mm-hmm.
you for really helping us to understand
Yeah,
that better.
maybe choosy consumers choose not to consume.
That's right. That's right. So anything else that we can be aware of before we wrap it up here?
I think it's so important to spend some time being thoughtful about things. And even, if if you're still not sure if you want to stop watching TV or all that sort of thing, maybe even sit down with your family and ask yourselves, like, what are the messages that we're receiving? Like, what are the underlying themes and tones that we're hearing about things? And are these things we really want to have in our life? And they're not all bad, but it's good to be aware of what they are at least and say, maybe we like this because this is giving a sense of value to things that we already perceive as being good, but this maybe isn't the best thing. And you and I were talking earlier about, sometimes marketing isn't always bad. If you have something that you really want to help people with, it doesn't hurt to know what really helps people accept those things. So when you know that you have something good, then maybe consider, what are the behaviors that people have? Sometimes, even parents with their kids. If you want to talk to your kids, start considering what's important to them. Maybe I can take what's important to them and tweak it just a little bit so they're more likely to do the thing I want them to do that's good for them when they're doing that instead. So I think strategizing in marketing isn't the worst thing. It's only when you're duped by it and when you're not considering, like, I think our minds are wonderful things and we can use them for so many good creative purposes. So to sit down and to consider, how do I want my family to go? Or how do I want my marriage to go? Or how do I want my life or the direction of it to go? How am I manipulating my life in that direction or even away from the things that are important to me by letting other people take over?
Yeah, I love that. And it's so true that, marketing is not all bad, but it's when it's used in a manipulative way, especially when it's not just manipulative, but then the end is not healthy or helpful. But both are really not good. And I was just, as I was listening to you, I was reflecting on, what's God's way of marketing. And it's interesting because, I believe that he does appeal to the emotion, but he also appeals to the reason, and he only wants what's good for us. And he says, come and let us reason together, right? And so I think a lot of times one of the best things that we can do when we think about the way God markets, it's like, what does he do? Well, he wants us to often take that time, like out in nature, for example, and we see the beauty and we're like awed, and that draws in the emotion. But then it's not maybe this like huge dynamic excitement that he brings in with the dopamine, but it's that still small voice that really speaks to our hearts and brings true health and transformation. And he also says, taste and see that I'm good. And so when we're kind of cooperating with God's marketing plan, we're sharing with other people and we're saying, okay, well, I want to be, a marketer like God. I think we can use those same sort of elements where, it's not like we're unemotionless and we're just appealing to reason. There is that emotional element, but there is also not that overpowering emotion. We also want to balance it with that reason to help people see, like, this is truly for your good. And, sometimes as a psychiatrist, I feel like I'm marketing mental health, if you will.
Yeah, we are. Well, I hope people want that. They see it as a need. I like that verse that you brought up, come let us reason together, because I've thought about this a bit, and we often focus on the reason together part or the reason, but I want to focus more on the together part, because if we're reasoning on our own, sometimes we are duped.
That's true.
But if we reason together with God and we let his reasoning be our reasoning, that's the together part, then we won't be duped so much. And or at all, in fact. And I think that's really important, that we reason with God, not alone by ourselves, thinking that we know so much.
That's right. Well, thank you, Amanda, for taking the time to really help us understand more about the psychology of marketing, how we don't need to get sucked into those deals that aren't really deals.
Yeah.
And also, just again, reflecting a little bit more on, how God does some healthy marketing, if you will, and how as we spend that time and we're intentional with looking and taking time with him and what he has created and what he wants, how he wants us to live our lives, that this will in the long run also help us not to get deceived by these other things, whether it's products or whether it is philosophies that could really be unhealthy for us. And God will help us make those best marketing decisions.
Yeah. And, it's interesting that how much money these companies spend to understand humans and how much God understands about us. He knows us intimately and innately. And to trust Him and what He says versus what somebody else says we need.
That's right. Well, thank you again, Amanda. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. I hope that this helps you be sucker-free for the rest of your life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like and subscribe. Your engagement will help us reach more people who need encouragement. To hear more episodes, learn about our other mental health resources, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.